Hello and welcome to part 12 of the small Neytiri grammar course. Today we have the second part of the Infix series, so we will talk about position 1 infixes. Here you see a small overview of the Infix videos. Part 1 is what we had last time. There we had an introduction, what an infix is, where to put an infix in a word, what infix actually exists, and we also learned some first infixes, namely tense and aspect, so when did something happen and is it finished or not. I highly recommend that you, if you haven't yet, watch that video first before coming to this video, because knowing what an infix is and where to put it in a verb is actually really important. We will not repeat that today. Of course, you can also learn it at another place. Just make sure that you know about infix positions before you listen to this video. Then today we will talk about the leftovers of position 1 infixes, namely the subjunctive. Then we will look at some combined infixes because, like you hopefully remember, you cannot have two infixes in one infix position. So for position 1 we actually have a bunch of combined infixes in case we need two infixes that are position 1. And lastly we will talk about participles. So how to turn a verb into an adjective. And then the next two videos will then be part 3 and part 4 of the infix series. In part 3 we will talk about the position 2 infixes, which is the positive and the negative mood, the inferential and the ceremonial. And in the last part we will talk about position 0, or also so-called pre-first infixes, which is the causative, the reflexive and the combination of the two. But let's start with today's topic. So here you see again the overview of all the infixes. In the first infix video you learned about the tense and the perfect and imperfect, and you also learned about the determined future. So those 3 boxes are already done, and today we will learn about all the others of position 1, so in the middle. It looks a lot, I know, but most of them are really just combination infixes. So once we learn the subjunctive, you will know the rest of these combinations already. So actually it's not so much. But let's talk about the subjunctive. Probably it's the infix you've been wondering about already, because it's kind of everywhere. You see it everywhere. And that is because it is used for many different things. So there are a lot of different situations where you will need if. First of all, if you just use the bare subjunctive, so just if for the meaning, then it's indicating a wish. So may something happen. But in most cases, actually, it's used for grammar. So grammar requires this infix a lot. And this is how you will most often encounter it. So modal verb constructions is the probably reason you will see it the most often. But you can also use it in commands. And it's triggered by certain words which normally have to do with an action not being realized yet, or something may happen, something like that. You will see it later on. So like I said, it's highly grammaticalized, so you in most cases you will need it just because the grammar requires it. So it makes sense to just learn the rules, and then you already have 9% of the cases covered for this infix. Let's start with the bare subjunctive if. So when to use it when you don't need it for grammar, but just want its meaning, so something may happen. And here we have some example sentences in English and what they become in Neytiri. First, may Ewa be with you. Ewa livu ngahu. So here we have the if infix to make it may Ewa be instead of Ewa is with you. You maybe recognize this phrase because you probably stumbled across the shortened version, namely Ewa ngahu, which is used to say goodbye, so Ewa with you. And that phrase actually is just a short version of Ewa livu ngahu. Then another sentence, may the force be with you, Tsyili livu ngahu. Let my arrow strike true, wayes visau, nirangal divaguk. And may the Neytiri unfold, ivong Neytiri. So in all the sentences, the meaning of the if infix basically is just may or let something happen. Next, modal verb constructions. Here we have a bit more to talk about. First of all, what are modal verbs? Modal verbs are verbs that influence other verbs. So I can fly, you start to run, we want to eat, we stop to eat, they try to learn, they dare to jump. In all of these cases, the bold verb is the modal verb, and it influences the italic verb, so the second verb. And most often, these verbs have to do with that something is possible to happen or may happen. So again, that's kind of the general theme of the subjunctive if. It's about actions being able to happen, may happen, possible to happen, but not have happened yet. In Natvi, the modal verb always must come before the second verb. Things can come in between, so I can have a word between the modal verb and the second verb. The only important thing is that the modal verb is somewhere in front of the second verb in the sentence. The second verb takes the if infix to kind of connect the two to each other. The modal verb takes all the other infixes if there are other infixes used. So last lesson we learned about, for example, am, the general past infix, and if you want to add that to a sentence with a modal verb, then the modal verb gets that am infix, not the second verb. There are some exceptions, namely position 0, so the pre-first infixes. We will talk about this, how that works in the video about these infixes. They cause some other exceptions too. Both modal and second verb can be negated. That's something we don't do in English, so it's probably a bit confusing at the beginning, but I will show an example, then you will see what the meaning difference there is, because sometimes there is actually quite a difference in meaning, which one you negate. But let's look at some examples. I can fly, a very basic sentence with modal construction. Oetsun Tsyili. So underlined, by the way, underlined is always the infix. That has nothing to do with stress. I just underlined the infixes here. Oetsun Tsyili. I can fly. So we see both roots we had followed here. First of all, the tsun is in front of the Tsyili because the tsun is our modal verb. And the Tsyili or the Tsvayon is our second verb. And the Tsvayon gets the if infix, so it becomes Tsyili. We want to eat. Neo aunga yivom. Here we see that the aunga can be in between the neo and the yivom. The neo still is in front of the yom in the sentence, so there is no problem. We stopped to eat. Vtolang yivom aunga. Here we see that, like I said, the vtang, the modal verb, takes any other infixes. So the ol infix, the finished action, goes into the vtang, not into the yom. So we get vtolang yivom aunga. They dare to start to jump. Kom vo snivei spive. Here we see something very interesting, namely that we can chain modal verbs. So the snivei in the middle is both, it's a modal verb for the spive, start to jump, but it's also at the same time the second verb for kom, they dare to start. Because of this, it actually also needs the if infix, because it is still the second verb for the kom, even though it's also at the same time a modal verb for the spive. We can't stop. Ketsun aungaf divang. Here you see that I put the ke, so the negation, in front of the tsun. So we cannot stop. We don't have the ability to stop. We cannot. The thing which is to stop. But I can also do this. I can say tsun aunga kev divang. And in this case, I negated the vtang, so the to stop, and I didn't negate the tsun, to can. So what this basically does is we can not stop. So we have the ability, we can, the thing which is not stopping. So there you see it's a small but fine difference in meaning. And in some cases, that can actually make a big difference. So always be a bit careful where to put the negation with modal verbs. But in most cases, you would just put the negation in front of the modal verb. There's one thing we have to talk about when it comes to modals, namely the L ending. You learned very likely already that if you have a transitive verb and then you have a direct object, then the subject, so the person who does something, needs the L ending. Not with modals. With modals, you don't put the L ending. There are some exceptions to this though, so basically exceptions from the exception. Here's one example sentence in English, I want to eat fruit, so I would get the L ending normally if you say I eat fruit, and the fruit, mauti, gets the T ending, mautiti, well, yom mautiti. But I want to eat fruit then looks like this. So the first sentence can be both, well, mautiti neo yivom, so with L ending, but can also be oe, mautiti, neo, yivom without. The second and third can also be both, but it actually makes a bit more sense to leave it out, and the last one cannot have the L ending. By the way, in all other cases that are not shown here, you cannot put the L. So, what is the rule here? It's literally just the word order. In the first word order, so if you first have the subject, then you have the thing that is eaten, so the direct object, and then you have the verbs, then it's actually more common to leave the L there. Except for very ceremonial or formal speech, then you leave it out. The second one, when you first have the direct object, then you have the subject, and then you have the verbs. If you put the L, it's 50% accepted. What does that mean? It means if you present the sentence with the L to a bunch of different Natvi, native speakers, and they would hear it, 50% of them would say, yeah, that's acceptable Natvi. 50% would say, nope, that sentence is stupid, don't do it. The third sentence has a similar rule, but it's only 30% accepted, and the last one in there, L, is unacceptable. And like I said, in all other cases, all other word orders, the L is not accepted, don't use it. So what do we learn from this? Like here's some examples. What do we learn from this? Make it simple for yourself. Leave the L out. You can look into stuff like this, like you can look into the specific rule later on again. For example, if you want to refine your Natvi dialect a bit, want to sound a bit like a native, then you can look into stuff, and then the first thing that the L, T, and then the verbs is more common actually, then you can use that. But in general, just leave out the L. It's always fine. So, it's important to notice that you cannot use just every verb as a modal verb just because it works like this in English. You can only use verbs as a modal verb if they are in the dictionary as a modal verb. So here are all known modal verbs. First, we have transitive modal verbs. Fmi, to try, attempt. Mai, to taste, to try, sample, evaluate, and so on. Neo, to want. No neo, it obviously comes from neo, so more want, to prefer. Sto, to refuse to do something. Can mean both, to aim a weapon if you use it as a transitive verb, or if you use it as a modal verb, then it means to intend to do something. And we also have a bunch of intransitive modal verbs, namely tsun, can or be able to do something, zene, must do something, zenke, must not do something, it comes from zene ke, var, to continue, vdang, to stop, snei, to begin or start, and kom, to dare. So these are all modal verbs. You can only use these verbs as modal verbs. Other verbs that you find and that make sense in English to use as modal verbs, you cannot use that way in Natvi. Then you need to find other ways to say what you want to say. Like I just told you, there are transitive modal verbs and intransitive modal verbs. And that distinction actually is kind of important. Because let's look at this. I want fruit. Mautiti, neo, well. Here probably we realize that the neo, which we before used as a modal verb, or neo yivom, I want to eat, suddenly is used like a normal verb, just with L and T. And that's possible because it is not only a modal verb, but at the same time also a transitive verb that you can use normally. If you now say, I want to eat fruit, you can do both. You can say mautiti, neo yivom oe, or you can also, instead of using it as a modal verb, just use the neo as a normal verb, normal transitive verb, with a subclause that is a direct object, so with futa. Well neo, futa, yivom, mautiti. In that case, the yom can either have the if infix or not, whatever you prefer. One other example would be, I try the fruit, my mautiti well, and if you then say, I try writing a patli, you can do both. You can say, mai oe mi vacto patliti, or well mai futa mi vacto patliti. So this works with all transitive modals, neo, no neo, mai, fmi, can, sto. They can all also be used as normal transitive verbs. This is especially interesting if you're a bit further in your studies, if you already learned about efforts, because this is just in both ways are valid. So if you haven't learned about subclauses yet, of course, you will just stick with the modal verb constructions. But of course, for later, it's also interesting to note that there are different ways to say the same thing. So, finally, we are done with the modal verbs. Let's look at some commands. A command is when you tell someone to do something. So, English examples, eat, please help your mother, don't argue, stuff like that. And building them in Neytiri is very straightforward. Namely, you can just write a normal sentence and leave out the you. So instead of nga yom, you eat, you can just say yom, eat. Note that we have an example of the you being still in there, vtang nga, stop, you, literally. But it seems to be more common to leave out the you or leave out the pronoun. So usually you just build a comment like this. Eat, yom. But you could also say yivom. Both of these are valid and both of these mean exactly the same. There's no meaning difference at all between yom and yivom as a command. Caio Paul noted that maybe at some earlier stage in the language there used to be a difference in meaning, like a very slight difference, but at this stage in basically modern Neytiri, let's call it like this, there is no meaning difference and you can just choose whatever sounds better for you when you want to make a command. The two other examples would translate to sa nokr rut e srong si, or with the if infix, sa nokr rut e srong si vi. Please help your mother. So with rut e, you can make a comment more soft and more nice. And like you learned in the negation video, we negate comments with the re e instead of ke. So re e wete or re e weti ve for don't argue. So, like I said, the if is completely optional, it doesn't change the meaning, just pick whatever sounds better for you. So, now we are already at the last part about the if infix, namely the words that trigger if. Some words just need if, like if you use these words, then you will need if, either in the current clause, if it's an adverb that refers to that clause, or if it is a conjunction, then you will need if in the first verb of the next clause. The list I give you here is probably not complete. It's just a list of words that I personally found useful. So it's a good start, but keep in mind that there might be others that I forgot to add here. First, probably one of the most used ones is to, if. So you can use it to make if clauses. If something happens, then something else happens. And it requires if in most cases, but not always. If you know that the condition holds for sure, then you don't need the if. What do I mean with this? Just look at the example. To nga ngain iwefu zurok. If you are tired, rest. So I look at you, you seem to be tired, but I don't know really, so I tell you, yeah, if you're tired, yeah, just go rest. But maybe you just told me that you are tired. Yeah, you go to me and say, yeah, I'm so tired, and then I can tell you, to nga ngain efu zurok. Since you are tired, rest. So it's basically the same sense, if you are tired, rest. But I already know that you're tired, so yeah, since you're tired, just rest. And in that case, I don't need the if infix because there is no uncertainty. I know for sure that you're tired, so just rest. Soon and sel are used for another type of if clauses. They are for so-called contrafactuals, so for things that are not real or not possible. Or stuff that already happened if it would have been different then. So for such things you can use soon, sel. And they require if in both clauses, so after the soon and after the sel. One example, soon o jaune di vungar, if you loved me, if you would love me, but you don't. Sel I vef o oi nitram ne au, then I would be so happy, but I am not. Note that in some cases the if here is optional, namely if the tense, so the time, is the same in both clauses. So in this case, both of these clauses are in the present tense. Yeah, if you would love me right now, then I right now would be so happy. Therefore, I can leave out the if in the second clause. So I could also say, soon oi jaune di vungar, sel efu oi nitram ne au. Next, let's go on to tsne. Tsne means that, and it is only used with certain verbs, and it also only uses if with certain verbs. If you want to build a sentence with a verb and you see the dictionary that used Tsyili, what I highly recommend is consult the dictionary. Look into Annotated Dictionary by Plumps for some example sentences with the verb, and there you will see if it uses the if infix in the next clause or not. So this is really something you have to learn. Consult the Annotated Dictionary, look for example sentences with a verb before you use it, and then you're on the safe side. But some examples: et elle si tsnedivu ohero unitaron. I respectfully request the dream hunt. Literally, I request that to me may be the dream hunt. Another example: boe mowasoli boa nur tsne hivum. She advised him to leave. And one example without if infix. So with srefei, you don't need the if infix. Set srefei oe tsne tsambongu tet au maut on ong. I'm currently expecting the war party back after nightfall. Next, fte and fteke. Fte means in order to, so that. Fteke is then the negated version, fteke, and means so that not. Two examples: oe inan fte nivume, I read in order to learn. So here you see that the fte causes the nume to learn to have an if infix, and so it becomes nivume. Then another example with fteke. Nare soli aioe fteke nehaung livok. We were careful not to get too close. Literally, we were careful in order to not, or so that not, we were too much close. Here again, you see that the log gets the if infix because of the fteke. Let's next look at two adverbs, namely Nisilpey and nirangal. Nisilpey means hopefully and requires if it is used as a sentence adverbial. In case you haven't watched my adverb video, a sentence adverbial is an adverb which kinda makes a comment about the whole sentence. So let's look at the English examples. Hopefully she's here. Hopefully she came. Hopefully she will come. Hopefully you like this video. In these cases, the hopefully kinda makes a comment about the whole sentence, like hopefully something happens. But we can also use hopefully in another way, namely, look at the last sentence here, she asked hopefully. We can also say this as she asked in a hopeful way. In that case, it's an adverb of manner, and then it doesn't need if. So, to look at the translated sentences, Poel Nisilpey tivok vetsengit. Hopefully she's here. We need if because the sentence adverbial is a comment about the whole sentence. Poe Nisilpey zimva'u. Hopefully she came. Poe Nisilpey sieva'u. Hopefully she will come. Here we see two combined infixes. We will look at the sentence again in a moment when we are talking about these. Poe Nisilpey polau. She asked hopefully. If we now wanted to say, hopefully she asked, so not that she asked in a hopeful way, but that I, as the speaker, say, yeah, hopefully she asked, then I would change the sentence to, Poe Nisilpey pilvaum, because then I need the if infix. And, like we learned before, we cannot have the if infix together with the ol infix in a verb, because only one position, one infix per verb, so we then would use the combined infix if, which we'll see in a second. Nirangal basically translates to I wish something happens. It doesn't really have a similar adverb in English. And it also needs some form of if infix, so either the bare if or a combined infix that has the if. Pol nirangal tirvok vetsengit. I wish she were here, but she isn't. Note, like with soon and sel, this also refers to things that aren't like this. So you wish for something, but it's not true. Poe nirangal zimva'u. I wish she would have come, but she didn't. Poe nirangal sieva'u. I wish she were coming, but she will not. And with that, we are done with if. I know there's a lot to take in, but let's look next at the combined infixes. You see them in the middle, and yeah, they're exactly what the name is. They're just combinations of the infixes you learned before. So if you understood how the other infixes work, so especially of course the tense, subjunctive and perfect imperfect, then you will not have any problems with the combined infixes. Let's look at the overview. First of all, we can of course combine all and with the tense infixes. So we get just infixes that combine the meaning of both. So for example, all and literally, is just a combination that tells us an action happened in the past and an action is finished. At the same time, if I combine all and so the perfective, the finished action, and the future tense, then it is something will have happened. So it's a finished action in the future. And yeah, these meanings just stack up like this. So it's just really a combination of these two infixes. And they're pretty predictable. I think if you see such an infix, you will usually know which two infixes are in there, because they're built pretty predictable. Then, like I said, we have also our combinations with if. First of all, if plus o is if plus is irf. And with the tense infixes, note that there's only one for the past and one for the future. So in combination with if, we don't distinguish between recent or near and general. So if in combination with the past just becomes imf, no matter if it is near past or just or general past. If plus I and ear can become either ef or ef. Note, these two mean the same. It's just two different versions of the same infix. There's no meaning difference between those two. It's literally the same thing. But yeah, these combined infixes, you will not see them very often, simply for the reason that Navi doesn't want to repeat information if it's clear from context. Of course you can use them, but you don't have to. So you can get around pretty much without using them ever. The only reason where you really need them sometimes is if you have, like we already said with, like we already saw with nirangal and Nisilpey, if you really need the if infix for some reason, for some grammatical reason, but also then need the past tense or future tense or something like that. So this is where you will see these combined infixes the most often. But let's just look at some examples. First of all, like I just said, if you need if with tense aspect, then you will just need one of these combined infixes. Some examples which we also already saw before, but let's just repeat them again. Pol, nirangal, tirvok, vetsengit, I wish she were here, but she isn't. So here we have if, which we need because of the nirangal, and you have the infix, so unfinished action, so she literally, I wish she were being here. Then poe nirangal simva'u, I wish she would have come, but she didn't. So again, we need the if because of the nirangal, and we need the or the im because it is in the past. Poe Nisilpey silva'u, hopefully she came. Poe Nisilpey sieva'u, hopefully she will come. Same reasoning here. And with Sun and Zel we also see it kinda often. So Sun o jaune limvungar, Zel imvefu o nitram ne au. If you had loved me, but you didn't, I would have been so happy, but I wasn't. And here again note that we can leave out the imf in the second clause because again it's the same tense. So we have in both clauses here the past tense. If you had loved me, I would have been so happy. So 2 times past tense, so we can leave out the infix in the second one. Then there's actually a quite nice combination with and all, because especially when you tell a story or something, you very often will set a scene basically with so tell what's going on in the background, and then with all you would tell actions that happened during that time. So nisngei, fmaunit, fo narmeo wiwan, senea frapor lolunu. They originally wanted, or literally were wanting, to hide the news, but in the end they revealed it to everyone. Or hikro mefo kakpam larmu maukrap olor kunsip. The two of them were deaf, or were being deaf, for a short time after the gunship exploded. So sets a context, and all introduce then actions that happened during that context. And yeah, also you can just use whenever it makes sense. Like I said, Navi doesn't like to say information twice, so you don't really see that often. But it's definitely grammatical, and just because there is the tendency to not use these if there's context, this doesn't mean that it's forbidden. So these are all official sentences, and you see that you can use them that way. Vpirmil welf futa aingana ceo cva feud. I was just thinking that you might want to see this. So irm, the R because was thinking, so it is an action, ongoing action in the past, and the im infix because just a minute ago, basically. Bol polaum dengat de baumit ali wel palmaum dram. He asked the same question that I had already asked yesterday. Ngase mi atzakem gedu voig amuye. What you just did was not proper behavior. Eveng opensarmung me fug. The child was coloring in a book. And that was it. So let's go on to the last topic for today, namely us and aun, which will hopefully not take that long. So us and aun turn verbs into adjectives. And we have two infixes, so we have two different types of adjectives. Let's look at these two sentences in English. The nantang hunts and the nantang is hunted. If I now were to describe the nantang in both sentences with an adjective, then the first one, it would be the hunting nantang, because the nantang is the one hunting. So it would be the active adjective. In the second one, it would be the hunted nantang, so the passive adjective, because the nantang is the one being hunted. He's the direct object of the action. And for these two different types of adjectives, we have us and aun. Us is the active participle, nantang atusaron, the hunting nantang, or we can, of course, also say, because it's now an adjective, tusarona nantang, it means also the hunting nantang. Note that after we put in the us into the taron, to hunt, it becomes an adjective. So we have to treat it like an adjective, meaning we also need the adjective a to put it together with the noun. And same goes for the aun, the passive participle, nantang ataunaron, the hunted nantang, or taunarona nantang means the same, the hunted nantang. These adjectives can only be used with a, not with verbs. So, for example, with lor, beautiful, I can say lora nantang, or nantang alor, the beautiful nantang, but I can also say nantang lulor, or nantang lam lor, so the nantang is beautiful, or the nantang seems beautiful. With these adjectives that are built with us and aun, I cannot do this. I can only use them together with the adjective a to directly bind them to a noun. So nantang lu tusaron is not possible to say the nantang is hunting. We will look at how to build the nantang is hunting sentence in a bit, so don't worry, we will cover that. Just a small thing about writing conventions. C verbs can also be used with us, and they then are written like this with a hyphen. So lurtok susia tute, the smiling person, or tute a lurtok susi means the same, the smiling person. And very important, aun can only be used with transitive verbs. And that makes kind of sense, because when you think back to the example with the hunted nantang, we said that the nantang here is the direct object of the hunting. So aun builds an adjective that describes the direct object. Yeah, intransitive verbs don't have direct objects, so that doesn't work. So it's just logical that we can use aun only ever with transitive verbs. Us, however, can be used with any verb. So one last thing, we can build the so-called gerund with te plus us. Te is a prefix that builds nouns. It's usually not productive, so you cannot just randomly slap it onto words and make new nouns with it. Only Caio Paul can do it. But in combination with us, it's actually productive. So you can use this to build a gerund of every single verb. So what is a gerund actually? It means the action of verb. So for example, te tusaron would be the action of hunting. Te yusom would be the action of eating. The resulting word is a noun, and this is important because it cannot have a direct object. Why do I say this? Because in English it actually can. The gerund is a bit of an intermediate thing between a noun and verb in some languages. The same also holds true for English, because I can say stuff like eating fish is healthy. So here we have eating, which is actually a gerund, but it also it has like the fish as a direct object, so it kind of acts a bit like a verb. It's a bit weird, but we cannot do this in Natvi, so I cannot say Ti som payoangit. That doesn't work. We have to do it differently, but that you will learn about when you learn about F words. But also in Natvi, it still slightly behaves like a verb, because it can actually take adverbs. So I can say stuff like Koren a auve tiroseie ausiteng. The first rule of living together. So ausiteng is an adverb to do something together. So I can say rei ausiteng, to live together. But I can also use it to modify the gerund of rei. So tiroseie ausiteng, the living together. Let's look at one final thing before we wrap up this lesson, namely the 3 English ings. Compare these 3 sentences. I am hunting, I see the hunting nantang, hunting is fun. In English we use hunting 3 times, but in Natvi it is quite different. If you watched both lessons about infixes so far very carefully, then you know that you will need 3 different infixes here actually, or 3 different things here to build the hunting word. First one, you will notice that these are 3 different types of words, namely I am hunting, here hunting is a verb. I see the hunting nantang, here hunting is an adjective. Hunting is fun, here hunting is a noun. And because of this, we need 3 different strategies here. First one would become oeteraron, I am hunting, it's an ongoing action. Second one would be what we just talked about, wetsea nantangit atusaron, I see the hunting nantang. It's the active participle, the active adjective, so we need us. And the last one is a gerund we just talked about. It's so the noun, the action of doing something, the action of hunting is fun. So tetusaron o lu. Always check in your English sentences which type of word you actually need. Do you need a verb? Do you need an adjective? Do you need a noun? And because in Natvi, this is very important to distinguish these things. Not only for this case with the ing, but also for others. So, let's have a small summary before we finish this lesson. If has many different uses, mostly for grammar. It can indicate a wish. It can be used in modal verb constructions like I want to eat. It can be optionally be used in commands like eat. And it's triggered by certain words like fte, fteke, tsne, fto, sun, zel, nisilpey, nirangal. Then we talked about combined infixes that you can use if you need 2 different position 1 infixes, because we cannot put 2 different infixes in one slot. We need to use the combined infixes instead. Us creates an active adjective, hunting. Aun creates a passive adjective, hunted. So the hunting nantang versus the hunted nantang. Te plus us creates the so-called gerund, so the action of hunting. It is a noun. Remember, all the infixes we learned about today go into position 1. And that was it for this lesson. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments, or you can, like always, contact me on Discord. I hope this lesson was helpful for you. Hi, Yelloweye!